Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today here live on the Inception Radio Network. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com, where you can discover all the products and services I offer, including you can get copies of Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods on the site, signed by myself and my co-author, Wayne La Liberty. For those of you that are listening to the show on YouTube or iTunes or on the Just Energy Radio website, I want to remind you that Just Energy Radio has moved from Friday afternoons to Thursday evenings from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And to listen to it live, you can go to www.inceptionradionetwork.com, or you can click through the Just Energy Radio website. But while you're at the Just Energy Radio website, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep informed of who's coming on the show, or you can like the Just Energy Radio page on Facebook, because we also keep posting who the guests are. We post copies of the archives onto the Facebook page. That's another way of keeping connected with the show and what's going on. Also, all right, I feel sorry. I don't have all the details yet, but I have a little bit more. Last week I was talking about a surprise tour that I am working on with Brian Forrester, who's been on the show several times before, to Peru. We're calling it the Science and Spirit Tour, where you get to go and check out different sites like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman, where they have those stones that just fit together that they can't quite figure out how they are. And you've probably seen Brian on Ancient Aliens. And but we're going down there. We have set the date for the beginning of June, like the very first week of June, but I don't have the exact date yet. I will be trying to finalize that tomorrow. So next week, I will have more information, hopefully have something put onto the webpage so that you can be kept informed of what's going on. And let's see, any more information? No, nothing else this week. But today we have like a back-to-back UFO kind of show. So it's like UFOs and ETs everywhere today. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking with John Ventre about UFOs over Pennsylvania. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking to Norio Hayakawa about Area 51, underground bases, and the global deception. Wonder what that is. What are they tricking us about this week? Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about John and get him on the air. John Ventre is a member of the FBI's InfraGard group and the DHS Regional Business Coalition. John is the Pennsylvania, Delaware, and West Virginia State Director of the Mutual UFO Network. He is also the author of the novels 12/21/2012, A Prophecy, and The Day After 2012. John is also a lifetime member of the NRA. We might have to have a little conversation. His webpage is johnventre.com. Please welcome to Just Energy Radio, John Ventre. Hey, John, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Rita.
Well, I'm just so glad to finally get you on. You know, when we had met in October at the Paradigm Symposium, I was already booked up, so yay. Okay, I have two questions before we even go into UFOs or your background in UFOs. Your book, 12/21/2012, and the day after 2012. So did your prophecy kind of come true?
Well, you know what's strange, and I said this on a bunch of radio shows that week, and a real big radio show here in Pittsburgh, the regular news radio, is that, you know, one of the things I talked about was that the Mayans got two things correct, but everybody seemed to skip over that. There were two astronomical things that they got perfectly correct that they should have had no way of figuring out 1,000 years ago. And everyone concentrated on the fact that the calendar ended and then supposed that meant the end of the world. And it never did, not according to the Mayans. According to other cultures, they said there would be destruction. But the two things that the Mayans did get right was that the Earth is on a 26,000-year cycle, and it has to do with the wobble of the planet. When it spins, it wobbles, and every 72 years, it changes 1 degree. So you see a different view of the sky. Every 72 years, it changes 1 degree. And the crazy thing is, it takes 26,000 years for you to get back to that starting point. The Mayans knew that, and that was the cycle that they talked about every 26,000 years. And we just ended the 4th cycle and started the 5th cycle. And the second point that I kept bringing up to people was that they also knew that there was a black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. In their sacred text, the Popol Vuh, they said there's a dark rift in the center of the sky. And most people say that means that there's a black hole. And we didn't find that black hole until about 20 years ago. So they had some knowledge there that they shouldn't have had. And that's the thing I harped on, but, you know, everybody wanted to talk about the end of the world.
But see, I'm glad that you weren't one of those people that were saying that it was going to be the end of the world, or else I'd have to, give you the evil eye through the microphone going, okay, but I'm still here. You know, we had a end of the world show. Well, it was called What Were You Doing While the World Was Coming to an End? And someone had posted on Facebook the comment, Happy Mayan Fool's Day. So I was just saying that the entire show. We had fun.
You know, KDKA Radio in Pittsburgh is the oldest radio station in the country. It was the first one. And when Mike Pintack asked me about the whole Mayan thing, I said, Mike, you got to understand, if you ever saw Back to the Future, Marty McFly comes back to 2015. So it can't be the end.
That's right.
That's right.
Okay, so I'm going to totally shift gears here, because this is the other thing that intrigued me in your bio. You know, you're a lifetime member of the NRA, so what do you think about all this gun control junk that's coming up right now?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me, you know, because if you think about 9/11, when they flew those planes into the trade centers and the Pentagon, we didn't outlaw planes. We didn't say that, now you got to take cars because you can't kill as many people in car accidents. I mean, we didn't outlaw planes. So, I'm one of those people that understands that there's crazy people out there, but you can't punish the sane people who's the vast majority of gun owners for the crazy people. And, when the head of the NRA got up and said, you got to put an armed guard in the schools, and the media made fun of him, I said, wait a minute. You have to do everything possible to save my Second Amendment before I agree to give it up. And if we put TSA officers at every airport, why can't you have the county sheriff or the state trooper? It's part of his job. You know, they rotate into the schools from 8 to 4, and that's part of their shift. I understand you're going to have to add one more officer, to the force. But you know what? I think you have to do that before you take away a basic right that you have in this country.
Good. Thanks for saying that. I like the part about the plane, though. Although we did get the TSA after the whole thing, and, I don't even want to go into that ugly debacle.
Yeah, but that was the step we took to provide security. Why won't we take that step to provide security in the schools. And you know what's going to happen, Rita, is, we're talking about these gun shootings. And I'm not a big, I have an AR-15. I've used it 3 times for target practice. It's an unbelievable weapon. I mean, I can hit a beer can at 100 yards away, which is incredible. But I don't really care about that gun, that rifle. I don't really use it or anything, but I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, but we're supposed to be talking about UFOs, but I wanted to touch on those before we even got there. John, how did you even get involved in the whole UFO scene in the first place?
Well, that's an interesting story. And, most everybody in the Mutual UFO Network, when you ask them, they say, oh, yeah, I was into this as a 10-year-old. I was reading every UFO book and I read Project Blue Book in the 60s. Well, I didn't get into UFOs until I was 40 years old. And the reason was my research into end-time prophecies. When I started writing that first book, which I published, I actually started on it in 1996. That's when I got interested in UFOs, was because the Mayans talked about extraterrestrials, the Hopi Indians talked about extraterrestrials, the Tibetan monks, then you read Ezekiel and the Romans talking about flying shields. And, and I said, you know what, there's something to this UFO stuff. So as I was doing the research on the end-time prophecies and the Mayan calendar, in 1997, I got involved in MUFON because I wanted to find out what they're talking about with these flying shields and extraterrestrials. So that's how I got involved.
Well, that is an interesting story because you're right. Most people have had, some interest when they were much younger, and especially to get to the level that you have. Being the regional director, I guess that would be well, MUFON keeps giving me states. They gave me Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, and I think I'm getting Massachusetts too in about 2 weeks. So, wow.
But that's all right. We can stay on top of it. I got a great crew here in Pennsylvania, and the cases that are just like they saw a light in the sky, we handle them from Pennsylvania, and we just call the person and get the rest of the details. But yeah, this whole end time prophecy thing was where I got involved in this. It just piqued my curiosity. I was more of a Comic-Con horror fan, growing up. That movie Super 8, that was me as a 15-year-old making horror movies. My whole family thought I was going to go into some sort of theatrical directing or something, But I love the old black and white horror movies. But that's what I was into. But UFOs, I mean, I liked action and extraterrestrials, but I wasn't into it.
But I just don't see you as a horror guy. But that's okay.
Oh no, I don't know if you ever heard of Famous Monsters of Filmland. It was a magazine that any horror fan knows about, and I used to collect that. I've got probably 80 of the real old issues of that magazine, but I loved all the black and white horror movies. Favorite movie, King Kong. That's my all-time favorite.
Cool. Let's talk about MUFON for a second. I mean, because I think everybody's heard that name.
Yeah.
And but what all do you guys do? What does MUFON do?
I can't tell you. No, just kidding.
It's a secret. You'll have to kill me and all the listeners. Yeah.
That's it. But it's interesting. When Project Blue Book ended in 1969, and that was a total farce. Their conclusion was that UFOs did not pose a threat to our national security. So when they ended, the Mutual UFO Network started. They said that the Air Force would no longer investigate UFOs. So MUFON stepped in as a private group to do the investigations that the Air Force claims they don't do. But they absolutely do the investigations that are a threat to national security. That's a fact. So that's how we got started. And, we have a website where if you see a UFO, you can report it to us. And, it gets sorted by zip code. If they're Pennsylvania, they come to me, and then I give it to the investigator that lives closest to it. And we do our thing. We look at, we go to websites and look for meteors, satellites, the space station, anything that can match up to what the person saw. And probably 80% of the time, we can find something that the person misidentified. And then you get about 10% of the hoaxes, and then you get down to the last 10%, which are just incredible. They are some unbelievable cases that, you just scratch your head and you say, I know this is real.
Okay, well, since you're kind of talking about that, what has been the most interesting case that either you've worked on directly or have researched?
Well, I think it's got to be the UFO wave over Pennsylvania in 2008. We were only getting about 90 investigations a year, and then all of a sudden in the second half of 2008, we got probably 225 cases just in a 6-month period, which was 4 times more than what we would normally get. And the one case was the one that the Discovery Channel did a show on, the Bucks County case. And also last April, I was on the Anderson Cooper show with one of the witnesses, in New York City, and we talked about it. But there were 2 cases that involved in 2008 in Bucks County that were just incredible. One was Denise Murda, and she lives in an apartment building, more like townhouses, and the dog starts barking 4 a.m. She goes outside, and she sees this triangular UFO approaching the house. And this happened to her probably 3 or 4 times. And on one of the instances, it kind of hovers above the housing complex, and it drops these metallic sprinkles, like she said, probes is what she described them as. It drops down into her tree, and then it kind of gets sucked back up like a magnet. It wasn't, a vacuum. It was like a magnet pulled them back up. And I tell you, when I heard the story, I said, yeah, right. Because, you got to approach them skeptical. You got to be skeptical about it, because I run into too many people that believe absolutely everything, and you can't. Your first reaction has got to be, show me, prove it, give me some more information. So we go over there, and Bob Gardner was the lead investigator. He's now the state director for Delaware. We promoted him. So he did a great job. What he did was he cut the leaves off the tree, a couple of samples. Then he took some samples from other trees in her yard and trees down the street and sent them to 2 different labs. So, and this was the whole key thing. There was 8 witnesses. There were other people in the office complex, the woman's daughter. So we had good witnesses, which is, the first thing. But the one thing that's rare is to get trace evidence. So Bob sends these leaves off to 2 different labs. Nancy Talbot up in Massachusetts, and the other one was Professor Levingood in Michigan. So they come back, and what the report says is only the leaves on Denise's tree where she says the probe was, the leaves had anthocyanin on them, which is a natural enzyme that the leaves produce when they're subject to high heat or radiation. So that tells you something happened. It also had boron and magnesium on the leaves. And, I said, so boron and magnesium. And this was right after 4th of July. So I said, magnesium could be for fireworks, that type of stuff. And but I said, what is boron doing on the leaves? And not boric acid, because boric acid's in fertilizers that they would spray the trees with. And the lab specifically said it was not boric acid, it was boron. So I look up boron, and boron is used in stealth aircraft. It reflects radar. It doesn't reflect radar. So if you shoot radar at a stealth craft and it's coated in boron, you don't get a signal back. So I thought that was interesting. And boron's also used in nuclear reactors and the paints. So that was interesting. And then I came across something that was written 20, 30 years ago by George Fawcett, and it was called faucets repetitions. And he lists 25 items that repeat on UFO cases. And number 6 was boron. So he said the best cases where you have trace evidence, they find boron on these UFO cases. So that was the deal. We also did a UFO Hunters segment with Bill Burns on that, and he got the local police to bring in a sketch artist, and they interviewed the 8 witnesses separately, and they drew the craft that they saw, and they concluded that it was the similar craft that each of the people described. So something happened in that case, and it was really interesting. And the other case that happened at the same time frame. So we go about 20 miles north to Doylestown. She was in Levittown. Both of them are about a half hour north of Philadelphia. And now this guy, he's living in a $3 million, $4 million home, retiree. He tells us a similar story. 3, 4 in the morning, dog barking, wakes him up. Same thing as Denise. And he looks out the window, and this happens to him twice, and he sees this large, cloud approaching his house. And he's watching it move really, really slow, and he sees a 6-sided craft, and it comes over the house. It happens again about a month later. This time he gets his wife, and they go outside, and there's a heat lightning storm. So as the sky's lighting up, he can see it clearer now for that split second that the lightning lights up the sky. And the interesting thing is he sees 6 triangular craft docked together. That's why it was 6-sided. And he says when the lightning goes off, he can see through the seams. So he saw the 6 objects docked, but there was space in the seams, and he could see the lightning through the seams. Now, he describes it for us, and the interesting thing is Bob Gardner, again, he goes down to talks to the Philly Tower at the airport. They invite him up to the tower, and they tell him that they had a large object with no transponder, comes on the screen, and matches up at 4 in the morning with Cliff's description, and they said it veered off to the northeast. Same exact thing that Cliff said. So that was both of them. You don't get radar and you don't get trace evidence. Those were 2 good cases. And then the whole fiasco came of trying to get the radar from the FAA. And this is a really good presentation that I actually give at the conferences. I show the 4 letters from the FAA saying that there's no, it's beyond the record retention period, and there's nothing, they can't give us anything. And I emailed the person at the Philly Tower with the procedures for retaining radar, and I got her reply saying, yes, I run an efficient office and I do have the radar. It's in a complete opposite of what the FAA said, that there is no radar. So I said to her, and I saved that, So I said, can you send me the discs? And she goes, all right, I'll send them to you. But she says you can't read them because you need the, the Raptor program from the FAA to read it. So I got somebody that can read it. I get the disc, we pull it up, and the discs are really corrupted and overlaid with information. But we're able to pull 6 screens, or 6 or 8 screens with the paints from the radar, So I replied back to her, and I said to her, we were able to get 6 screens from that disc. Her reply back is, I'm surprised you were able to get anything off of those discs. Now, why would you say that? If you gave me a good disc, why would you say I'm surprised you were able to get anything from the disc? So it kind of shows that there was a cover-up there. You know what? When we finally looked real close, the discs she gave us was the wrong date. I never did get the discs from her for the correct date of the sighting. But I have that paper trail that I show, and you can just see the lies there where, the FAA is saying that there's nothing to give you, and she's given it to me, and, and I've got the discs, even though they're the wrong date. I think it was the day before that she actually gave me. But those 2 were excellent cases, and you run into a lot of good cases. I'm running into a lot of them up in the New England area, but I don't have enough investigators up there. So we're trying to work them over the phone and by our laptop, but that's not really a good investigation.
I mean, it just seems like the credibility of the witnesses has over the years improved, or at least that's the what I end up feeling. You see these people that work in business, law enforcement agents are having these sightings, and yet they're still getting dismissed. Do you have any sense of when the powers that be, the government or whatever, is going to get with the program or stop poo-pooing or trying to cover up things that are actually happening?
Yeah, there's no incentive for the government to come clean on this. And, and going to your first point, in that 2008 wave, we had 3 retired military people report the UFOs. We had 3 police officers, 1 retired detective, and 2 current police officers report seeing those UFOs. And when I contacted the precinct and the media supervisor, they would not allow the officer to come forward. Actually, the TV show, Discovery Channel, wanted to bring that officer forward to say what he saw. And it was one of the best, descriptions you ever want to see. The guy was a military buff. He knew all the planes that were in the sky. Him and another officer talking over the radio, 6 other witnesses on the street looking up at this UFO. And then I talked to him, and he says, this isn't good for my career. And he says, I can't come forward with it. So, we had to drop it. But, you think about it, and I'll reference the Cometa report from France that was done in 1999. It talks about, it starts off talking about real good UFO cases and why it's real and all of that. But the conclusion was that the United States is in possession of technology way beyond any other country. And they want it shared with other countries, and they want to know how the U.S. got their hands on this. And if you read the couple of pages before, they're talking about back engineering the Roswell crash. So, I mean, they're kind of implying that it was a UFO back engineered is what they're saying. So now if you're the U.S. government, why are you going to give that information out? I just retired as a state security director for UPS, big company. And, my whole career has been on the security side, and I wouldn't share that information either, I mean, you want that in the hands of China or North Korea or Iran, So I do believe that we did back engineer, and we got some good technology from that, as Colonel Corso and Bill Burns say in the book they had written the day after Roswell. But, on the other hand, you got a constitution that the government's not supposed to be this separate entity, But I do understand the fact that if we've got this technology and what you're seeing out there, I'll give you an example. NASA, we just ended the space shuttle program, right? Mm-hmm. So then I find out, it was last year at this time, that the Air Force had its own space program. Well, they've had it since 1982, and every year since 1982, it's been funded higher than NASA. And they have a drone space shuttle called the X-37B. They've been flying it for 3 years. I just found out about that last January. So, we end the space shuttle program, but the Air Force already has one that was better. So that's all part of, what's being done out there. And I'm sure whatever we see coming from NASA is going to be the leftovers that this Air Force is done with. They give it to NASA, and the Air Force has got something else, So that's the game that's played. And, on one hand, I understand it. We don't want to let that out, but we also don't want, our military to be its own separate entity that, like Richard Dolan says, they're like a breakaway society that they're doing their own thing and we're funding it through black projects, and they're not even accountable to the people or Congress.
Well, yet, that brings up a totally unrelated but related topic is, why we're in so much debt. My question is, well, where did all the money go?
Well, I agree. I agree. And, Donald Rumsfeld, a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago, I mean, it hit the papers and everything, and you can Google it. He said that there were, I think he said the number was up around $1 trillion missing if you go back over X number of years into black projects that he can't find where the money went. It later got whittled down to like $100 billion. But he was saying that, I don't remember, what was he, Secretary of Defense? He said he was going back and he'd find the money, go to this company, to that company. The company goes out of business. The company didn't exist. And he says, we're missing billions and billions of dollars. He might have said 600 billion, and it ended up the General Accounting Office said, well, we actually can't find about $100 billion. But that's where it goes. It goes to the Air Force. And, hey, look, the way I look at it is I sleep pretty good at night. And I'm just glad that China or Iran didn't back engineer a UFO and that they had the superior technology. So I'm glad that the United States has it. But then on the other hand, don't debunk every time a ufologist goes on television. It is so ingrained in our society to make fun of UFO people. And the CIA did its job. But that's all unconstitutional. You can't do that. And they've done it, and they're very good at it. But the CIA should stick with foreign affairs and not their own citizens.
But, it's not just the UFO people that they debunk. They debunk the psychics. They debunk the ghost hunters. They don't like anybody.
Yeah. Well, and the CIA had their own, remote viewing program. So, how did they come out and say, like, well, psychics don't... Well, they were doing that. They were looking for Osama bin Laden. They were using remote viewers to look for Osama bin Laden,
Well, apparently they weren't very good, or they knew he was already dead, or whatever.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that you mentioned early, and I want to just come back to, is you talked about the 200 incidences that happened in 2008. And so were they 200 individual reports, or were they 200 instances, where you might get 3 or 4 calls about something flying over one area?
Yeah, they were 200 separate individuals, and but so many of them matched up. There were really 2 different sightings. One was a high-flying, bright object in the sky that was really high in the sky. And, that could be the space station. It could be a meteor. Matter of fact, I saw it. I've never seen a UFO. June 28th of 2008, I have a pair of Dobermans. They're very well trained. I let them out the front door. I don't even have them on a leash. And I look, all of a sudden I see something in the sky. It gets my attention. I look up. I see this really bright object move really fast across the sky. And then it disappears behind a cloud. So I get on a... different websites, and I find that an asteroid, at the exact time that I saw it, it passed by and it was reflecting the moonlight, and that's what I saw. But the people that saw the low-flying ones all saw a triangular UFO, and that's what was seen by a lot of people. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the case, it started actually coming out of Lake Erie, and there were cases in Ohio and West Virginia, and we even matched some up where it was seen in East Lake, Ohio, at Lake Erie. It was seen in Wheeling, West Virginia, a craft, and then it was seen like over State College, Penn State, a few minutes later, and they were like matching up. So the wave kind of came out of Lake Erie. It started in Pittsburgh, and then culminated over in the Philly area with about over 200 cases in the Philadelphia area, mostly Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
I think it's interesting when I think back to my first hearing really about UFOs was watching the Betty and Barney Hill movie on TV and kind of getting a little freaked out about it.
Yeah.
But when you would hear about situations, it was one person seeing something and you can go, that person's a whack job. And this one person seeing something. But it seems like, and I'm going to use the Phoenix Lights incident, where these days it seems like there are groups of people seeing things, or this person here and then someone a mile away and someone 3 miles away, that it's not just a person seeing something, but there are these collectives of people seeing stuff.
Well, those are your best cases, when you can get the multiple witnesses or you can get the trace evidence. And you know what was a shame with the Phoenix Lights, though, was Governor Fife Symington saw it, and then he held that press conference and he made fun of it. Now, just imagine if he had held the press conference and he said, I saw it myself and I don't know what it is. But he was so afraid of panicking the people, he couldn't tell the truth. And, that was a key moment right there in our, UFO history that, he lied. He made fun of it and and that was that. And then a couple of years later, he came out and, by then he's no longer the governor. He don't have any juice. And he comes out and says, I lied. I did see it. Well, you should have told the truth the first time.
Yeah, but,
I mean, I understand.
I understand it too. So
yeah,
but you're right. It could have been kind of like a door opening event.
Absolutely. I mean, to have the governor, come out and say, like, I could just imagine in Pennsylvania, if Governor Corbett, if we had this big case going on right now, and Governor Corbett comes out and says, I saw this huge triangle in the sky. It blocked out the stars. I called the Air Force. They said it's not theirs. I don't know what it is. Instead, they made fun of it, and they had some guy dress up in a costume. It's a shame.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't Jerry Pippin or anything.
That's right.
One of the things that also you mentioned was about the UFO, the second incident you were talking about how it was in this thundercloud, traveling through the sky in a thundercloud. And I find that interesting because when you look at mythological traditions, that's one of the things that comes up all the time, is that the gods are, the gods, especially the sky gods, traveling through the sky. In I think it's the Ramayana, there's a section that talks about, when you see the sky darken and the clouds appear and the lightning, you know that the gods are near. Yeah. Because there is such a close association with one to the other.
People should get some of those Vedic texts, the Hindu texts, like what you spoke about, the Mahabharata, the Zayan, and look and read some of those. I give a presentation called UFOs in Art and History, and I go back through Renaissance paintings, but I spend about half my presentation talking about India and quotes and what was written. You can't imagine, this is a story from 6,000 years ago, actually 8,000 years ago, it's 6,000 BC, and they're talking about flying craft, they're talking about nuclear weapons. Clearly, there isn't one person in the audience when I read the paragraphs that doesn't say that that's not a nuclear explosion that took place. Plus, in Mohenjo-Daro, we find the skeletons, and they're 50 times more radioactive than skeletons should be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, I just find that, because we're a Western civilization, we're not exposed to Buddhism, Hinduism, et cetera, but when you read that stuff, and I just kind of discovered it, probably with the Ancient Aliens show that came out 4 years ago, so I started looking at that stuff too, and it's just absolutely incredible, the descriptions. As a matter of fact, I came across a description from Hammurabi, who said that the greatest honor to be given is to fly in a Vimana, which is a flying craft from India, to Peru. So, and I don't know why people haven't put together the Nazca lines in Peru, the landing strip. That was for the flying craft from India to fly there. Hammurabi said that. So,
see, I haven't found that one. You'll have to send me where you found that, because I like that one.
Yeah,
that's
Hammurabi said it was the greatest honor, to be bestowed, is to fly in a Vimana, and to fly over to Peru and Borneo and these other places in craft.
But for the listeners, Hammurabi was a Babylonian king, so he was in the Middle East. So going to Peru, it's kind of a long ride.
Hey, he could take your trip that's coming up.
That's right. That would be so cool.
Can you email me something on that? Because I've wanted to go to Machu Picchu and Cusco and all those places. I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Well, we should talk.
Okay.
That would be fun. Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit because probably the most famous incident that happened in Pennsylvania was the Kecksburg incident. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Kecksburg was investigated by Stan Gordon. And it's kind of strange that, he had been the Pennsylvania State Director for MUFON for, probably 20 years. He lives about 2 miles from me. I mean, isn't that an oddity that you got two state directors living in the same town? But he did the Kecksburg investigation, and that whole case, in my mind, whether it's a UFO or it's a Russian satellite or a meteor, the whole case comes down to whether the craft turned. And from what the witnesses said, the trajectory, everybody says this thing came over Canada. It came over, I thought it was Montreal, and then it came over Ohio, made a left. So the fact that it made a left in Ohio and came back into Pennsylvania, we're about 75 miles from the Ohio border, and then it slowed down before it crashed into Kecksburg, which is about 6-7 miles from my house. And that's the whole case there, was that. And, one of the interesting things I came across was James Oberg. And I put this in my book. Matter of fact, I wrote 2 other books. If anybody goes to my website, UFOs Over Pennsylvania, and a sci-fi book called Apophis 2029, about a real asteroid that may hit us. But I came across, and this was really cool because I have all the MUFON archives. I came across a letter from James Oberg. He's that well-nourished, chubby guy with the mustache that always is a spokesman for NASA. And I got him changing his story a couple of times. But the thing I came across was a letter from him to MUFON back in probably in the late 60s. And in the letter, he says that he thought that it was the Russian probe, the Cosmos 96, and that probably people falsified the trajectory and other stuff because they said that the Russian probe landed in the Indian Ocean. And so I got that letter. And then he's on a Sci-Fi Channel special on Kecksburg, and he's saying it's a meteor. So I got the letter. Then you got him in the TV show saying it absolutely was not the Russian probe. It was a meteor. And then a couple of years later, when Leslie Kean and the Sci-Fi Channel won their case and sued NASA, and they had to turn over the evidence, which they lost. The box of evidence got lost, and we never did get our hands on it. You got James Oberg again saying, well, it was the Russian satellite. We just couldn't say it at the time, and it wasn't a meteor or a UFO. So the guy flip-flops 3 different times, and I thought that was interesting. I put that in my book, and I put his letter in the book, too, which I don't think anybody, any researcher, even Stan Gordon, had access to that letter, because I've got all the Pennsylvania MUFON files.
But what happened to that thing?
Well,
I mean, from what I understand, they put it on a truck and drove off with it, and it was never seen again.
Yeah, that's a whole interesting story there. So you got the thing making a left turn from Ohio into Pennsylvania, slowing down before it lands. It's a bell-shaped, dome-shaped object. I mean, it wasn't that big. Maybe like a little bigger than a car, let's say. Round with a dome on top. And the locals down there said that, and this is all verified, the military came in about 45 minutes, an hour or so later, and cordoned the place off. Nobody could get in. I mean, they had their rifles, and they were telling people, you can't go in there, you get shot, you have to leave the area. And people saw the flatbed truck with this object under a tarp being taken away. And, an interesting part of the story is the Tribune Review. That's the newspaper that I get delivered to my house. John Murphy was all ready to, he actually went down to the site when it happened. He had his story. He interviewed the witnesses. So the following day, he's ready to go on air. He gets visited by the so-called men in black. Somebody from the military shows up. They were probably in uniform, but and they told him, you cannot go on air and say the story that you have in your hands. And they told him what to change. And it's interesting when you talk to the like the woman in the office there on the radio show and for the paper, she says he was never the same after that. He had the story of a lifetime, interviewed the people, and he was told you cannot, say that story. So he gave a watered down story, and they said he was never the same after that. And he was another one like John Mack that a few years later got hit by a car and passed away. And, I think that's what we were talking about before we went on air, the high incidence of ufologists that pass away under mysterious events.
Well, I mean, ufologists, government people that find out too much or know too much.
Absolutely. And it's our CIA. I mean, I love our military branches. I really do. I love the CIA. They are so good at the psychology and head games and mind games and all of that. But, use that on the Iranians and the Chinese and North Koreans. Don't use it on our people. And I'm serious, but that who's doing this? Where is this coming from? It's coming from them. Where else is it coming from?
It just makes you wonder if we're doing that to our own people, what are we doing in other countries?
Oh, well, yeah. I agree.
That's a scary thought, too. But then you have to go, wow, I wonder what kind of spin they put on their stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, I think you got to be grateful you live in this country, even though, we do have problems and issues. But, the things that go on in these other countries, you could never, ever do here. I mean, if they do those things here, they're doing it very covertly, and they put out a whole spin and stories and manipulate the media, et cetera, and that does happen, but not to the extent what happens to their own citizens in Russia and China and North Korea. And I mean, remember the case with Putin, where that billionaire guy, the oil guy, that guy's in prison right now. It was the other guy who escaped Russia and went to London, and he was spilling the beans on Putin and all of that. Putin sent one of his agents over there with a fast-acting radiation thing, serum or something, and poisoned the guy. But the guy lived long enough, way longer than he should have. And do you remember that case? And it hit the media and all of that?
Yeah. It took them a long time to figure out that he had like radiation poisoning, and then when they did, they were like, "Well, how did he get that?" And
and Scotland Yard actually sent, because they got from the guy, where did you go? And they backtracked everything where the guy was. They get to this little pub in London, and the freaking place is radioactive. His table, the bar where they mixed the drinks, it was all radioactive right there. So that's where, and the guy had met with this Russian agent there in that pub, and the guy poisoned him. And it was the type of poison that was a really fast-acting radiation, but it was really hard to detect unless you were looking for it. And so I mean, there's a case, that you would hope that they couldn't do something like that over in this country, but that's an example of what happens in these other countries. Power corrupts, and ultimate power corrupts ultimately.
We're getting a little bit close on time, but I want to ask you at least this one last question. So if ETs do exist, what implications do you think their existence will have on humanity?
Well, I think that this whole question is a part of everything. And when you get into this and you really start to learn about it, and I'm still learning, even after, 15, 16 years now, I still come across stuff and I learn stuff. But the more I get into this, I'm even questioning now how much of our history, how much of the manipulation that goes on is them. Like people talk about the Illuminati, they talk about these secret societies. You look at when they're over our nuclear reactors, the blackouts that took place. I mean, blackouts only take place when there's a power surge. somebody's using that power. That's how you get a blackout. Yeah, I think that this whole UFO question has something to do with our existence, with everything. And I think it probably goes really deep, and it's probably something that would blow people's minds, that maybe that's what the government knows, and that's why they can't come forward with it. I really think that it's probably a lot deeper than any of us could imagine, and I've always believed it's part of our evolution. They engineered us, Is it? And this is the main reason I got involved in this, because I want to know where we came from, why we're here. Is it creation with a God? Is it evolution that takes place in a straight line that has all kinds of holes in it that you can't prove because evolution doesn't add up? Or is it genetic engineering because they were here 50,000 years ago?
Way longer, John. Way longer.
Well, I'm going to go by what the Air Force said. They taught a physics class in the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And in that class, it was Chapter 33, Physics 370 class, they said they have been visiting this planet for as long as 47,000 years, and there are 3 or 4 different species. That's what they taught to our Air Force cadets for 3 years at the Air Force Academy. So
get out of town.
I can email.
I want those pages from the book. Is it like a secret physics book?
No, I'll send it to you. I have it on email. It's Chapter 33. I'll forward it to you. That's what it says. That is, we can do your next show. I'll email that to you. We can do a show talking about this evidence. That chapter. We could talk about the Fire Officer's Guide to Disaster Control, where the hazmat book for the fire department has a chapter on UFOs. And we could talk about the Cometa report. I'll email that to you.
Okay, that would be very cool because that's like super secret stuff that I've never even heard of.
Yeah, I mean that's the evidence, but I think it's part of everything. And you know what I say to people is, I just hope Jesus was Jesus and not an extraterrestrial, because like Eric Von Daniken, he would say that he's an extraterrestrial, et cetera, and just a man, or But and then they say to me, well, why do you hope he's not an extraterrestrial? And I say, well, based on the way we treated him, I can only imagine how it's going to go for us when his people show up.
See, I always just joke around that he just had a really good PR guy.
Yeah. But after what we did to him, I hope he wasn't an extraterrestrial based on how we treated him.
So you don't buy into the whole reptilian running the government, that are running the Illuminati, that are running the state and local officials?
I don't know. I think it's a possibility. That's why I said I think this whole UFO thing goes really, really deep. It's above top secret. It could be that reptilian thing. There are just times that it slips out and things happen, like the UFO at O'Hare Airport, the one over, Phoenix in 1997. And you can't explain what these things are. The ones that were over Bucks County 4 years ago. And, it kind of slips out every now and then, and people take notice, but and I say the CIA does such a great job of just debunking it, putting false stories out, discrediting the people that see it, and it never gets mainstream because I really think it goes so deep that we may not be able to handle the truth. But it could be the reptilians or it could be the Nordics. They kind of look like us. So, I could see them breeding with us because they're the human of the 4 that the Air Force talked about. The Nordics would be the ones that engineered us.
Right. I agree. We agree on that. Do you think that there have been more sightings in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, versus, there have always been sightings, but do you think there's been a rise in the last few years?
Yeah, actually there have been. Like I said, from that 2008, when, it's funny, 2008 started with Stevensville, Texas case. It ended with the Bucks County case because our cases came in the second half of the year. And ever since 2008, our number of cases reported have probably doubled. And what also happened at that same time was MUFON got a TV show where we had 3 episodes on the Discovery Channel. One was that Bucks County case. But when people saw the TV show, we started getting a lot more cases. And, And I will tell you, MUFON, we are working on another TV show, hoping that it'll come through on a cable channel, but I can't say anything about that. But when those type of things happen and you get some, mainstream media like Ancient Aliens, UFO Hunters, you do get a lot more cases.
So do you think they are more credible cases? I mean, it just seems, and this is, I'm not a UFO buff, okay? So, I'm pretty upfront about that. But it just seems like on Facebook, you're constantly seeing more and more people posting videos of UFOs. And it just seems like they're all over the place. And I just can't imagine that there are so many people spending so much time making hoax videos.
Well, there's two things. One is, as it gets more popular and you treat the people correctly, they're comfortable coming forward and reporting it. So for every case you get, there's probably 10, 20 other people who saw that one too, but they absolutely will not come forward. And then as it gets more popular, let's say through a television show, you get more hoaxes. So, the thing I like to say is, and it's pretty well accepted, is, like I said, about 80% we can explain, about 10, 12% are hoaxes. And you really get down to that last 7%. And I even say it's probably 2 to 3% that are the real UFO cases. So, if you had 100 sightings, or let's say we get 300 a year, there's probably only 9 or 10 cases that are the real UFO cases out of the 300.
My sister said she saw a UFO hovering over the Catholic elementary school we went to. And I'm like, when did that happen? She goes, I don't know. I was still in elementary school. And I'm like, well, why am I just hearing about this? She told me like last year.
Yeah, and you come across so many credible people that'll tell you that. It's funny. I had this huge job at UPS as their state security director. I had that job in 6 states. And when I just retired last April, I was the security director for Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia. Plus, I ran our public affairs for the 3 states with the congressmen and senators. And nobody knew I was doing this UFO stuff until the TV show came out, and they saw me in it.
Oops. You mean you didn't wear like a little mustache and glasses or anything?
I tried to put the phony nose and the glasses on. But some people laughed, but others, so many came up to me privately, one-on-one, and said, I'm glad you're doing this because now I know it's real. Or they came up to me and said, I saw something, or my parents always told me about something they saw. So, this is a real phenomenon. It's just a shame we can't come clean with it, and I think, like I said, there's something horrible to this that I don't think we can come clean with it. I hope we do, and I hope I'm the one who breaks it. But, I hope we could find the truth because I really want to know, am I the product of a god, or did I evolve from a freaking chimp and a barbarian, or am I the product of superior creatures that genetically engineered me? And I think it's door number 3.
Me too. Ha John, the music's going to come up here in a second. If somebody wants to get a hold of you or get any of your books or anything like that, where should they go?
Yeah, just go to johnventre.com, VENTRE, johnventre.com, and my books are there, my contact information, and we do 3 conferences here in Pennsylvania also. We're doing Erie coming up this May, and then we do Pittsburgh and Philly in the fall.
Cool. And so is information about those conferences on your site as well?
Yeah, that's there. And then there's our MUFON site, which is MUFONPA.com, MUFONPA.com.
Cool. This was a pleasure, John. I'm so glad that I've had you on the show. And we'll have to talk. You'll have to send me that stuff, and we'll figure out
I'm gonna
some
email,
other thing.
Yeah, I'll email that to you right now, and we'll do a show on the evidence.
All right. All right, John, I am going to let you go, and we will talk on the other side.
All right, thanks.
All right. Bye-bye, John. That's John Ventre. His website is johnventre.com, and we'll be back with Norio Hayakawa after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.